The billionaire gets stuck in the elevator with the pizza delivery girl, and what happens inside changes everything. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what's the longest you've ever been stuck in an elevator? And at the end of the story, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy. The screech of metal was sudden and violent. One moment, the elevator was ascending smoothly, its quiet hum a backdrop to the classical music playing softly from a hidden speaker. The next, it jolted with a sickening lurch, throwing its two occupants off balance before grinding to a halt with a definitive final groan. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging the small space into near-total darkness, broken only by the dim, eerie glow of the emergency light above the control panel. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was the frantic pounding of Leah Phillips' own heart. "Okay," she whispered to herself, gripping the warm pizza box she was holding like a life raft. Of all the deliveries to get stuck on, it had to be the one to the penthouse of the tallest, fanciest building in the city. A frustrated sigh cut through the silence from the other side of the elevator. "Unbelievable," a deep, impatient voice muttered. "Absolutely unbelievable." Leah watched as a shadowy figure, tall and impeccably dressed, moved toward the control panel. The emergency light cast just enough of a glow to illuminate the sharp lines of a suit that probably cost more than her entire college tuition. The man jabbed the door open button with an aggressive stab of his finger. Nothing. He jabbed it again. Still nothing. He then pressed the alarm button, a loud, obnoxious buzz that made Leah jump. He held it down for a good 10 seconds before finally jabbing the intercom button. "This is Levi Whitmore in Express Elevator 2. I am stuck between the 49th and 50th floors. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. Get me out of here, now." The voice that crackled back was tinny and unhelpful. "Sir, we're showing a power surge in this section of the building. Maintenance has been alerted. Please remain calm." "I am calm," Levi snapped, though his tone was anything but. "I am also late. How long will this take?" "We don't have an ETA at this time, sir. Please wait for further instructions." The intercom went silent. "ETA? No ETA?" Levi growled, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He turned and finally seemed to notice Leah for the first time, huddled in the corner with her pizza box. His eyes, even in the dim light, were sharp and dismissive. He gave her a quick, irritated once-over, faded red polo shirt with a Pizza Palace logo, worn-out jeans, a baseball cap, and then looked away as if she were just another piece of the elevator's interior. "Of all the days for this to happen," he muttered to himself, pulling out his phone. "No signal." He let out another frustrated groan. Leah, meanwhile, had moved from initial panic to a state of weary resignation. This was just her luck. Of course, the one time she gets a delivery to the elusive penthouse of Whitmore Tower, she ends up trapped in a metal box with a man who looked like he gargled with nails for breakfast. "You know," she said, her voice startling him, "for a guy in a suit that probably costs more than my car, you're not very good in a crisis." Levi turned to her, his eyebrows raised in a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said, shifting her weight. "Jabbing the buttons like that isn't going to make the elevator magically start working. It's a machine, not a stubborn mule." He stared at her, clearly not accustomed to being addressed this way, especially by a pizza delivery girl. "And I suppose you're an expert on elevator mechanics?" "Nope," she said, popping the P. "But I am an expert on things that are broken and can't be fixed by yelling at them. My 2004 Toyota has taught me a lot about patience." Levi let out a short, humorless laugh and turned away, resuming his pacing in the small space. The glorious, savory scent of pepperoni and garlic began to fill the confined air, a stark, delicious contrast to the sterile, tense atmosphere. "Of all the people to be stuck with," Levi muttered under his breath, clearly audible, "I get stuck with a pizza." "Hey, don't blame the pizza," Leah retorted, patting the box protectively. "This is a double pepperoni with extra cheese. It's an innocent victim in all of this, and it smells a lot better than your cologne, by the way. No offense." Levi stopped pacing and turned to her again, a look of sheer disbelief on his face. "Did you just insult my cologne?" "It's a little aggressive," she said with a shrug. Smells like money and boardroom arguments. He was about to retort, but he was so thrown off by her complete lack of intimidation that he just shook his head and leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. He was Levi Whitmore. People didn't talk to him like this. They agreed with him. They feared him. They tried to impress him. They did not compare his Tom Ford cologne to boardroom arguments. Leah decided that if she was going to be stuck, she might as well be comfortable. She slid down the wall and sat on the floor, placing the pizza box on her lap. She opened it, and the aroma intensified, a warm, comforting cloud in the cold, dark elevator. She pulled out a slice, the cheese stretching in a perfect, glorious string. "Are you seriously going to eat that?" Levi asked, his voice a mix of disgust and fascination. "Well, yeah," she said, taking a bite. "We could be here for a while, and frankly, this pizza is too good to die cold and uneaten. It deserves to fulfill its destiny." She took another bite, closing her eyes in satisfaction. "Want a slice?" she offered, holding one out. He gave her a look that suggested she had just offered him a plate of dirt. "I don't eat that." "That? It's called pizza. It's a major food group." She took another bite. "Your loss." They fell into silence again. The only sounds were the faint hum of the emergency light and Leah happily munching on her pizza. Levi tried to focus on his upcoming meeting, on the billion-dollar deal he was about to close, but his focus was repeatedly broken by two things: the outrageously tempting smell of the pizza and the complete absurdity of the woman sitting on the floor of his private express elevator. Then his stomach growled. It wasn't a quiet, polite rumble. It was a loud, demanding, traitorous roar that echoed in the small, silent space. Leah stopped chewing, a slow, wicked grin spreading across her face. She looked at him, then at the pizza, then back at him. "Sounds like your stomach disagrees with your elitist food policies," she said, her eyes dancing with amusement. Levi's face, even in the dim light, was a mask of pure mortification. He, Levi Whitmore, who regularly dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, had just been betrayed by his own digestive system in front of a sarcastic pizza girl. "I'm not hungry," he said, his voice tight with denial. "Right," she said, holding back a laugh. "That was just your stomach clearing its throat," very loudly. She picked up another slice, this one loaded with pepperoni, and held it out to him again. "Come on, Mr. Whitmore. You're trapped in a box. Your meeting is probably canceled. The world will not end if you eat a slice of pizza." He stared at the slice. It smelled divine. He hadn't eaten since a rushed, tasteless breakfast that morning. The warmth radiating from the cheese was calling to him. He looked at Leah's smiling, challenging face. For a man who prided himself on control, he was in a situation where he had none. His schedule was ruined, he was trapped, and he was hungry. With a heavy sigh of defeat that seemed to drain all the arrogance out of him for a single moment, he slid down the opposite wall and sat on the floor, mirroring her posture. "Fine," he grumbled, reaching out. "Give me a slice. But if I get heartburn, I'm sending you the bill for my doctor." "Deal," Leah said, passing him the slice of pizza. "But if you like it, you have to admit that my Toyota and I were right about patience." He took the pizza, their fingers brushing for a brief second. He looked at the slice in his hand as if it were a foreign object, then at the smiling woman across from him. He took a bite. The flavor exploded in his mouth, rich, savory, and surprisingly, profoundly comforting. His eyes closed for a fraction of a second in pure, involuntary satisfaction. When he opened them, Leah was watching him, her grin wider than ever. "So?" she prompted. "Admit it, it's the best thing you've tasted all day." Levi chewed slowly, a battle raging within him between his pride and his taste buds. Finally, he swallowed. "It's adequate," he said, trying to sound nonchalant, but then he immediately took another, much larger bite. And in that moment, in the dim, quiet intimacy of a broken-down elevator, something inside the cold, controlled world of Levi Whitmore began to change. Levi Whitmore finished the slice of pizza in 3 large, almost savage bites. He stared at the crust left in his hand for a moment, as if surprised by his own lack of decorum, before placing it carefully back in the box. Leah watched him, a triumphant glint in her eye. "So," she said, unable to resist, "was it adequate?" He shot her a look, a mix of annoyance and something that almost resembled embarrassment. "It was acceptable," he conceded, his voice a low grumble. He then cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of his CEO authority for street food. Leah burst out laughing, a genuine, hearty laugh that filled the small space and seemed to make the dim emergency light glow a little brighter. "Oh wow, you really can't admit it, can you? Your pride is more fragile than this cardboard box." "My pride is perfectly intact," he retorted, though the effect was slightly ruined by the small smear of tomato sauce at the corner of his mouth. "You've got a little something." She pointed to her own mouth. "Right here." He swiped at it, missed, and then swiped again, succeeding only in spreading it slightly. Leah couldn't help it. She giggled again. "Other side." With a frustrated sigh, he pulled a pristine folded handkerchief from his suit pocket. Of course he had a handkerchief, and wiped his mouth with meticulous precision. "Better?" "Much," she said, her smile softening. "You look almost human now." He actually chuckled at that, a quiet, rusty sound, as if he hadn't used those muscles in a while. He leaned his head back against the wall, the tension in his shoulders seeming to ease for the first time. "This meeting I was going to, it was to finalize a $50 million acquisition." "Wow," Leah said, genuinely impressed. $50 million. That's a lot of pizza." "It is," he agreed. "And for the past 6 months, it's been my entire life. 17-hour days. Conference calls at 3 a.m. with Tokyo. Skipping meals. My entire existence has been a series of scheduled events, all leading up to a signature on a piece of paper." He looked at the pizza box between them, and then a power surge and a slice of pepperoni pizza. He shook his head, a look of genuine wonder on his face. "This is the first unscheduled thing that's happened to me in years." Leah listened, her playful demeanor softening into something more thoughtful. She was starting to see past the expensive suit and the arrogant facade. He wasn't a monster. He was just lonely. "You know," she said quietly, "my grandma used to say that a life without surprises is a life half-lived." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," he murmured, his eyes on the pizza box. "She was," Leah said, a flicker of sadness in her voice. "She's the one who taught me how to cook. This pizza place, it's just a job, a way to pay the bills. My real dream is to open my own bakery." Her eyes lit up as she spoke, a passion that was infectious. A small place, cozy, with a big armchair in the corner for people to read in. The kind of place that smells like fresh bread and cinnamon all day long. Levi listened, completely captivated. He was used to conversations about profit margins and market shares. He had forgotten what it was like to hear someone talk about a dream with such pure, unadulterated joy. "Why haven't you done it?" "Money, mostly," she said with a shrug. "And fear, I guess. It's scary to put everything you have into one big dream. What if you fail? And what if you succeed?" He countered, the question coming out more gently than he intended. She looked at him, surprised by his sincerity. "I don't know. I've never let myself think that far." They sat in a comfortable silence for a while, the shared pizza and the unexpected intimacy of their confinement creating a fragile bubble around them. He was a billionaire CEO, she was a pizza delivery girl. But in that moment, in that broken-down metal box, they were just two people. Suddenly, a loud groan of metal from above shattered the quiet. The elevator jerked once, then the main lights flickered back on, blinding them for a second. The classical music resumed its polite, placid tune. "Attention passengers!" The intercom crackled to life. "Power has been restored. We will be moving shortly." The bubble was broken. Levi immediately straightened his suit, his CEO mask slipping back into place. He stood up, brushing off his pants, the brief moment of vulnerability gone. Leah also got to her feet, closing the pizza box, the dynamic between them shifting back to what it was, two strangers from different worlds. The elevator began its ascent, and a few seconds later, the doors slid open on the 50th floor. Two maintenance workers in blue jumpsuits were waiting, looking apologetic. "Mr. Whitmore, we are so sorry for the delay," one of them began. "Just make sure it doesn't happen again," Levi said, his voice clipped and dismissive as he strode out of the elevator without a backward glance at them. "Hey," Leah said, stopping in front of the workers. She gave them a warm, genuine smile. "Thanks for getting us out of there. You guys are lifesavers." "No problem, miss," the younger worker said, clearly surprised and pleased by her kindness. "Have a good day." "You too," she said before turning to leave. Levi was standing a few feet away, watching her. He had seen the entire exchange. He had treated the workers like they were invisible. She had treated them like heroes. The contrast was stark, and it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "Hey," he called out as she started to walk down the long, empty hallway toward the main elevators. She stopped and turned, the pizza box held in front of her like a shield. "Yeah?" He walked toward her, pulling his wallet out. It was a sleek, black leather wallet that looked like it cost a fortune. "For the pizza," he said, holding out a crisp $100 bill. Leah looked at the money, then at his face. She didn't take it. "No thanks," she said. He frowned. "I insist. You shared your food. I should pay for it." "It was a rescue pizza," she said with a small smile. "Rescue pizzas are on the house. It's a rule." "That's a ridiculous rule," he said, though he was starting to find her stubbornness incredibly charming. "Maybe," she shrugged, "but it's my rule." She started to turn away again. "Wait," he said, a note of desperation in his voice that surprised even himself. "What's your last name?" She looked at him, a curious, almost playful glint in her eyes. "Why? You planning on sending me another bill for heartburn?" "No," he said, a genuine smile finally breaking through his stern facade. I'd like to know who I was stuck with." She hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to let him into her world just a little bit more. "It's Phillips," she said at last. "Leah Phillips." "Leah Phillips," he repeated, the name feeling strangely significant on his tongue. "Well, Mr. Whitmore," she said, giving him a little mock salute with her free hand. "It's been an experience. Try not to get stuck in any more elevators." And with that, she turned and walked away, her worn-out sneakers squeaking softly on the polished marble floor. Levi stood there, the $100 bill still in his hand, and watched her go until she disappeared into the main elevator bank. He was left alone in the silent, opulent hallway of the 50th floor, the floor that housed his personal office, his kingdom. The meeting was forgotten. The $50 million deal seemed insignificant. All he could think about was the lingering taste of pepperoni, the sound of her laughter, and the name that was now echoing in his mind. Leah Phillips. He walked slowly back to his office, the $100 bill still clutched in his hand. He sat down behind his massive mahogany desk, the city of Chicago spreading out below him like a map. He looked at his phone, at the dozens of missed calls and urgent messages from his team. He ignored them all. Instead, he picked up the intercom that connected to his executive assistant's desk. "Sandra," he said, his voice a low, determined command. "I need you to find someone for me. Her name is Leah Phillips. She works for a place called Pizza Palace. Find out everything you can. I want to know where she lives, what her schedule is, and most importantly, I want to know where she plans to open her bakery." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Sir? A bakery?" "You heard me, Sandra," he said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Find her." He leaned back in his chair, looking out at his empire. For the first time in a very long time, Levi Whitmore felt something other than the cold calculus of business. He felt a spark, and he was not about to let it go out. For 3 days, Levi Whitmore lived in a state of controlled obsession. He went to his meetings, made his calls, and ran his multi-billion-dollar empire with the same ruthless efficiency as always. But underneath the surface, a different kind of algorithm was running, one that had nothing to do with stock prices or market projections. It was an algorithm that kept replaying the sound of a woman's laughter, the determined look in her eyes, and the surprisingly comforting taste of cheap pizza. "Anything else, sir?" Sandra, his executive assistant, asked, standing by his desk on Friday morning. She had just finished briefing him on the quarterly earnings report. "Yes," Levi said, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers. "The Leah Phillips file. What did you find?" Sandra, a woman who had procured rare art, chartered last-minute jets to Monaco, and once located a specific type of truffle found only in a remote Italian forest for him, was momentarily thrown. "The Pizza Palace employee, sir?" "That's the one," he said, his tone leaving no room for questions. She opened a separate, much thinner folder. "Leah Phillips, 26 years old, lives in a small apartment in Logan Square, works 60 hours a week at Pizza Palace, no criminal record, credit score is average." She paused. And according to our real estate analyst, she has visited the same vacant commercial property on North Kedzie Avenue 7 times in the last 2 months. Levi leaned forward, a flicker of interest in his eyes. What kind of property? A bakery, sir. Went out of business a year ago. The property is in foreclosure, scheduled for auction in 3 weeks. Sandra looked at her notes. She also has a 5-year business plan saved on her public cloud drive for a bakery called The Sweet Rise, complete with menu concepts, design sketches, and profit projections. It's surprisingly detailed. Levi stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city. A bakery, the big armchair in the corner for people to read in. He remembered her words perfectly. "Buy the building, Sandra," he said, his back still to her. Sandra blinked. The entire building, sir? It's a 3-story mixed-use property." "The entire building," he confirmed. "And Sandra?" "Yes, sir. Do it anonymously. Use one of our subsidiary corporations, and I want the keys on my desk by Monday." The following Monday, Leah was finishing a grueling double shift at Pizza Palace. She was exhausted, her feet ached, and she smelled faintly of burnt cheese. As she was wiping down the counter, her manager called her over. "Phillips, some guy in a suit was here asking for you." Her heart did a little jump. A guy in a suit? Tall? Looks like he's perpetually annoyed at the universe. "That's the one," her manager grumbled. "Said his name was Whitmore. Left this for you." He handed her a crisp, cream-colored envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was not a letter, but a single, newly minted key and a folded note with an address, the address of the old bakery on North Kedzie. "I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss, regarding a rescue pizza and a lesson in patience." Leah's mind raced. What was this? A joke? A trap? She stared at the key, then at the address. Against her better judgment, she untied her apron, grabbed her bag, and walked out the door. The old bakery looked just as she remembered it. Dusty, forgotten, but full of a quiet, stubborn potential. The windows were grimy, and a faded for sale sign hung crookedly in the doorway. She hesitated, then slid the key into the old lock. It turned with a satisfying click. She pushed the door open, a bell above it jingling weakly. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust and disuse. But as she stepped in, a set of temporary bright construction lights flickered on, illuminating the space. And there, standing in the middle of the empty room, was Levi Whitmore. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in dark jeans and a simple gray sweater, his hands tucked into his pockets. He looked nervous. "What is this?" Leah asked, her voice a mixture of suspicion and awe. "How did you get a key?" "I have my ways," he said, his usual arrogance replaced by a strange, almost shy hesitation. "I came to make you a business proposal." "A business proposal?" she said, crossing her arms, her guard immediately up. "Listen, Mr. Whitmore, I'm not for sale. If this is about you feeling guilty and trying to throw money at me, you can save it." "This isn't about charity, Leah," he said, his voice serious. He gestured around the empty space. "I know this is the place you want, the one you've been dreaming of." She was stunned into silence. How did he know that? "I did some research," he admitted. "You have a 5-year plan. It's brilliant, by the way. Your projected profit margin in year 3 is ambitious, but achievable." "You hacked my computer?" she asked, incredulous and angry. "It was a public cloud drive with no password protection," he corrected gently. "Leah, I bought this building, and I want to offer you this space." She stared at him, a storm of emotions warring inside her. Anger at the invasion of her privacy, shock at the audacity of his gesture, and a tiny, treacherous spark of hope. "I can't accept this," she said, shaking her head. "I can't be your pet project, your little charity case." "It's not charity," he insisted, taking a step closer. "It's an investment. I'm a businessman. I recognize potential when I see it. The potential of this location, this neighborhood, and the potential of the baker." He looked directly into her eyes. "I'm offering you a standard commercial lease, first and last month's rent, a security deposit. We'll draw up a contract. You'll pay me back through your profits, on a schedule you can afford." She was still shaking her head, overwhelmed. "Why? Why would you do this?" "Because," he said, his voice dropping to a lower, more intimate tone. "In the elevator, you told me your dream. And you talked about it with so much passion, so much life. You mentioned the big armchair in the corner for people to read in. You said you wanted the whole place to smell like cinnamon." He pointed to a dusty corner near the front window. I think the armchair would fit perfectly right there." That was it. That was the detail that broke through her defenses. He hadn't just seen her as a project. He had listened. He had remembered. He had seen her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she fought them back. She was a businesswoman now, not a victim. She straightened her shoulders and looked at him, her expression shifting from suspicion to a sharp, professional focus. "A contract?" she said, her voice firm. He blinked, surprised by her sudden shift in tone. "Yes, a legally binding one. I want my own lawyer to review it," she said. "Of course. And the rent has to be at market rate. No special discounts. I pay what any other tenant would pay." "Agreed. And you," she said, pointing a finger at him, "you are the landlord, nothing more. You don't get a say in my menu, my decorations, or the color of the napkins." A slow, brilliant smile spread across Levi's face. He had expected tears, gratitude, maybe even an argument. He had not expected this fierce, determined negotiation, and he found it utterly, completely captivating. "Deal," he said, extending a hand. "Landlord, nothing more." Leah looked at his outstretched hand, then at his smiling, hopeful face. She took a deep breath, the dusty air of her future bakery filling her lungs. With a firm, decisive motion, she shook his hand. "Deal," she said. "But just so you know, Mr. Whitmore, my lawyer is my cousin Vinny. He's a paralegal in traffic court, and he's mean." Levi burst out laughing, a real, unrestrained laugh that echoed through the empty building, filling it with a sound it hadn't heard in years. The sound of a new beginning. The week after Leah signed the lease was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. The old bakery, once a dusty tomb of forgotten dreams, was now a hive of activity. Leah was there from sunrise to sunset, a smudge of drywall dust permanently on her cheek, a look of fierce determination in her eyes. She hired a small, local crew to handle the plumbing and electrical, but she was determined to do the rest herself, tearing down old plaster, sanding floors, painting walls. It was exhausting, back-breaking work, but it was hers. Levi, true to his word, stayed away. He was the landlord, nothing more. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up. He was giving her space. But what Leah didn't know was that every evening after she had gone home, a sleek black car would park across the street. Levi would sit in the darkness, just watching the warm glow of the work lights inside the bakery, a strange mix of pride and longing in his chest. He was respecting her boundaries, but he couldn't stay away completely. It was on a Thursday, after a particularly grueling day of trying to scrape a century's worth of old paint off a brick wall, that Leah finally hit her limit. She was covered in paint flecks, her muscles ached, and she was pretty sure she had more dust in her hair than on the floor. She sat down on an overturned bucket, buried her face in her hands, and let out a single, frustrated sob. "Having fun?" A deep voice asked from the doorway. She looked up, startled, to see Levi leaning against the doorframe. He was back in his CEO armor, a perfectly tailored suit, no tie this time, but still radiating an aura of a man who didn't belong in a dusty, half-demolished room. "What are you doing here?" she asked, wiping her eyes quickly with the back of a paint-splattered hand. "Come to inspect your property, landlord?" "Something like that," he said, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the progress and the sheer, chaotic mess. He then looked at her, at the exhaustion etched on her face. "Looks like you could use a hand." Leah let out a bitter laugh. "And what are you going to do? File a strongly worded memo to the old paint, demanding it remove itself?" He smiled, a genuine, disarming smile. "I was thinking something a little more hands-on." Before she could protest, he took off his expensive suit jacket, folded it carefully over a clean sawhorse, and began rolling up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt. "Wait, what are you doing?" she asked, stunned. "You're going to ruin your clothes." "They're just clothes," he said, picking up a paint scraper. "Show me how this works." What followed was an hour of the most endearingly clumsy manual labor Leah had ever witnessed. Levi Whitmore, a man who could command a boardroom of sharks, was utterly defeated by a simple paint scraper. He held it at the wrong angle, scraped with either too much force or not enough, and managed to get more paint chips on himself than on the drop cloth. You're terrible at this," Leah said, laughing so hard she had to hold her stomach. He was trying to scrape a section above his head, and a shower of white flakes had landed directly in his perfectly styled hair. He looked like a CEO who had just survived a localized snowstorm. "It's more difficult than it looks," he grumbled, though he was smiling too. He wiped his brow, leaving a streak of white dust across his forehead. "Here, let me show you," she said, getting up and standing beside him. She took his hand, adjusting his grip on the scraper. "You have to hold it like this, gentle but firm. Let the tool do the work." He was standing very close. She could smell that cologne again, but this time, mixed with the honest scent of dust and effort, it wasn't so intimidating. He wasn't looking at the wall. He was looking at her. "Leah," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Yeah?" she whispered back, her own heart starting to beat a little faster. "I have no idea what I'm doing," he confessed, a look of genuine helplessness in his eyes. She laughed, breaking the tension. "I noticed. Okay, you're fired from scraping." She took the tool from his hand. "You're on painting duty." She handed him a roller and pointed to a wall that she had already prepped. "Just try to keep it on the wall, okay? Not on the floor, not on the ceiling, and preferably not in your hair." He took the roller with the seriousness of a man accepting a Nobel Prize. "I can do this." He couldn't. He was even worse at painting. He left streaks, missed spots, and at one point managed to step directly into the paint tray. "Oh, for the love of," he muttered, looking down at his expensive leather shoe, now a lovely shade of antique white. Leah just shook her head, a wide, genuine smile on her face. "You know," she said, leaning against the wall, "for a guy who runs $1 billion empire, you're kind of a disaster." He looked up from his paint-covered shoe, and the look he gave her was surprisingly vulnerable. "I know," he admitted quietly. "I'm good at one thing, Leah. Making money. I've spent my entire life in boardrooms looking at spreadsheets. I don't know how to do this." He gestured around the room at the tangible, real work she was doing. "I don't know how to build something with my own hands." She stopped smiling, her expression softening. She walked over to him and took the paint roller from his hand. "It's okay," she said gently. "You don't have to." "But I want to," he said, his voice full of a frustration that seemed to go deeper than just paint. "I watch you in here, turning this forgotten place into something beautiful, something with a soul. You're building something real, Leah. My world, it's just numbers on a screen. It's not real, not like this." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. He was the billionaire, the man who had everything, and he was envious of her, a girl with nothing but a dream and a dusty old room. "My father," he said, his gaze distant. "He built this empire I inherited. He loved the deals, the power. But our home, it was like a museum. Silent, perfect, untouchable. We had a dining room table that could seat 30 people, and I remember eating most of my meals there alone." He finally looked at her, a profound sadness in his eyes. "This place, even with all the dust and the mess, it feels more like a home than my house ever did." Leah's heart ached for him. She reached out, and without thinking, gently wiped the streak of dust from his forehead with her thumb. "Maybe," she said softly, "you just needed to get your hands dirty." He didn't pull away. He just stood there, looking at her, his guard completely down. The air was thick with unspoken feelings, with the scent of wet paint and the quiet hum of the city outside. He leaned in, just a fraction of an inch. She didn't move. Her own breath caught in her throat. The shrill ring of his phone shattered the moment. He flinched back as if waking from a dream, pulling the phone from his pocket with a curse. "Whitmore," he answered, his voice instantly shifting back to the clipped, authoritative tone of a CEO. He listened for a moment, his jaw tightening. "No, the deal is off the table unless they meet our terms. I don't care what their board says. Hold the line." He hung up, the spell broken. "Sorry," he said, running a hand through his now paint-flecked hair. "It's okay," she said, stepping back, the professional wall sliding back into place between them. "You should probably go. You've got important CEO things to do." "Yeah," he said, though he didn't look happy about it. He picked up his jacket, looking at his paint-splattered shirt and shoes with a look of comical dismay. "I think I've done enough damage for one day." "You were a terrible painter," she said, a playful glint returning to her eyes. "But I was a great paint tray stepper inner," he retorted with a smile. "The best I've ever seen," she agreed. He paused at the door. "Leah?" "Yeah? Can I come back tomorrow to help?" She pretended to consider it. I don't know. My insurance probably doesn't cover landlords with a chronic inability to handle basic tools. I'll sign a waiver, he said, his smile widening. She laughed. Okay, landlord, you're hired. But tomorrow, you're on sanding duty. It's harder to mess that up. Don't bet on it, he said, and with a final, warm look, he was gone. Leah stood alone in the quiet bakery, the smell of his cologne faintly lingering in the air. She touched her own cheek where his face had been so close. Her heart was a mess of conflicting emotions. He was her landlord. He was a billionaire. He was a clumsy, lonely man who just wanted to feel something real. She looked around at the mess, at the half-painted walls and the dusty floors. It was a long way from being a bakery. And her relationship with Levi Whitmore was a long way from being anything simple. But as she picked up her own paintbrush, a slow, hopeful smile spread across her face. For the first time, neither felt quite so impossible. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern that was as bizarre as it was wonderful. Every day, after finishing his duties, running a global financial empire, Levi Whitmore would show up at the dusty shell of the Sweet Rise, change out of his $1,000 suit into a pair of jeans and a t-shirt he'd bought specifically for the occasion, and report for duty as the world's most overqualified and least competent renovation assistant. Okay, landlord, Leah would say, hands on her hips, a smudge of paint on her nose. Today, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to sand this wall, and only this wall. Please try not to sand the windows, the floor, or yourself. You have very little faith in my abilities, Phillips, he'd retort, picking up the sanding block with a look of intense concentration. My faith is based on empirical evidence, she'd shoot back. Yesterday you tried to use a caulk gun as a stapler. He was, without a doubt, a complete disaster. He was clumsy with tools, perpetually covered in a fine layer of dust, and had a unique talent for spilling things in the most inconvenient places. But he was also dedicated. He was there every single day, listening to her instructions, trying his best, and never once complaining. He was seeing her dream come to life, not from a distance, but from the inside, with sawdust in his hair and paint on his expensive shoes. Their banter became their love language. They argued playfully about the best color for the trim. Eggshell and antique white are the same color, Leah. They are absolutely not, you Philistine. They shared cheap takeout lunches sitting on overturned paint buckets, and they learned about each other in the quiet moments between the chaos of renovation. He learned that she hummed off-key when she was concentrating, that she had a fierce love for old black-and-white movies, and that her greatest fear was not failure, but mediocrity. She learned that he had a surprisingly dry sense of humor, that his favorite book was a worn-out copy of The Great Gatsby, and that beneath the layers of corporate armor there was a man who was profoundly lonely. You know, she said one afternoon, as they were cleaning brushes, for a guy who probably eats off gold plates, you're surprisingly okay with eating cold lo mein out of a cardboard box. It tastes better when you've earned it, he said, his gaze lingering on her. And in that moment, the space between them felt charged again, just like it had during the almost kiss. But they were always interrupted by a delivery, a call from a contractor, or simply the exhaustion of a long day. The unspoken tensions simmered just beneath the surface, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The bubble of their strange, dusty paradise was destined to burst. It happened on a Tuesday. They were in the middle of painting the main wall a warm, buttery yellow. Leah was on a small stepladder, carefully cutting in the edges, while Levi was handling the roller, managing to get more paint on his t-shirt than on the wall. They were laughing, arguing about whether classic rock or 80s pop was the better painting music, when the sound of stilettos clicking on the dusty concrete floor made them both freeze. A woman stood in the doorway, looking as out of place as a diamond in a sandbox. She was tall, impossibly thin, and dressed in a white designer pantsuit that was probably worth more than all the renovation materials combined. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe perfect chignon, and her face was a mask of bored, aristocratic disdain. She surveyed the messy, half-finished bakery, her nose wrinkled as if she had just smelled something unpleasant. "Levi?" she said, her voice a silken drawl of disbelief. "What on earth are you doing in this rustic hovel? And why are you covered in—" "Is that paint?" Levi went completely still. The playful, relaxed man who had been arguing about music was gone, replaced instantly by the cold, guarded CEO. "Cassandra," he said, his voice flat. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," she said, her eyes finally landing on Leah, who was still perched on the stepladder, paintbrush in hand. Cassandra gave Leah a slow, dismissive once-over, her gaze lingering on Leah's paint-splattered overalls and messy bun. "I see you've acquired a project." Leah felt a flush of anger. She didn't know who this woman was, but her tone was a universal language of condescension. "I'm not a project," Leah said, her voice clear and firm from the stepladder. "I'm the owner." Cassandra let out a small, tinkling laugh that was completely devoid of humor. "The owner? Of this? Darling, how quaint." She turned her attention back to Levi, ignoring Leah completely. "Levi, your mother is having a fit. You've missed the last 3 charity board meetings. People are starting to talk. They're saying you've gone rogue, hiding out in Brooklyn with your new charity case." "She's not a charity case," Levi said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Oh, please," Cassandra scoffed, waving a dismissive, manicured hand. "I know how you get. You find some broken little bird, nurse it back to health to prove you have a heart, and then you get bored and move on. We've seen this before." She finally looked at Leah again, a cruel, pitying smile on her face. "Enjoy it while it lasts, dear. His attention span is notoriously short." Leah felt her grip tighten on her paintbrush. She was about to climb down and give this woman a piece of her mind, but Levi spoke first. "That's enough, Cassandra," he said, stepping in front of Leah, subtly shielding her. "Is it?" Cassandra raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "I'm just stating the facts. You belong at board meetings, Levi, not playing handyman in a bakery." She said the word bakery as if it were a particularly nasty disease. "Come home. Your mother sent the driver." "I am home," Levi said, his voice a low, intense rumble. Cassandra stared at him for the first time, looking genuinely surprised. "What did you say?" "I said I'm home," he repeated, and this time he turned to look at Leah, his eyes full of a fierce, protective fire that made her heart stop. "This is more real than any boardroom you and I have ever sat in." "You can't be serious," Cassandra said, her voice rising in disbelief. "You're choosing this," she gestured around the dusty room, "over your own life? Over us?" "There is no us, Cassandra," Levi said, his voice cold as ice. "There hasn't been for a very long time." He took a step toward her, his posture radiating a command and authority that Leah had only glimpsed before. "Leah is not a project. She's not a charity case. She is the most determined, brilliant, and authentic person I have ever met. She is building her dream with her own 2 hands, something you and your trust fund wouldn't know the first thing about." Cassandra's face went from smug to furious. "How dare you?" "No," Levi said, his voice dropping even lower, more dangerous. "How dare you come into her space and insult her? She has more integrity in her little finger than your entire social circle combined." He pointed to the door. "Now get out." Cassandra was speechless. She looked from Levi's furious face to Leah's, who was watching the scene unfold from the stepladder with wide, shocked eyes. With a final, venomous glare, Cassandra turned on her heel. "This isn't over, Levi," she hissed. "You'll come crawling back. You always do." The click of her heels faded, leaving a deafening silence in their wake. Levi stood with his back to Leah, his shoulders tense, his hands clenched into fists. He was breathing heavily, as if he had just run a marathon. Leah slowly climbed down from the stepladder. Her own heart was pounding. She had never seen him like that, so fierce, so passionate, so completely and utterly on her side. "Levi?" she said softly. He didn't turn around. "I'm sorry you had to witness that," he said, his voice rough. "Don't be," she said, walking up behind him. She gently placed a hand on his back. "Thank you." He finally turned, and the look on his face was raw, vulnerable. "Is that what you think?" he asked, his voice full of a pain that had nothing to do with Cassandra. "Is that what everyone thinks? That you're just my project?" "I don't care what they think," she said, her gaze steady. "I care what you think." "I think," he said, taking a step closer, his eyes searching hers, "that you are the most real thing that has ever happened to me." He reached out and gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a fleck of paint she didn't even know was there. The air between them was electric again, but this time there were no ringing phones, no interruptions. There was only the quiet of the bakery and the unspoken truth that had just been laid bare. "Leah," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. He leaned in, and this time, she didn't hesitate. She met him halfway. The kiss was everything the first one should have been. It was explosive and tender, desperate and certain, all at once. It tasted of dust and paint and weeks of unspoken longing. His hands moved from her face to her waist, pulling her flush against him, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, her fingers tangling in his paint-flecked hair. In that moment, he wasn't a billionaire, and she wasn't a pizza girl. They were just two people finding a home in a half-finished room, building something far more important than a bakery. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, they rested their foreheads together. "Wow," she whispered, a shaky laugh escaping her. "Yeah," he murmured back, his own voice unsteady. "Wow." He looked into her eyes, a slow, happy smile spreading across his face. "Just so you know," he said, "you're a much better kisser than you are a painter." She laughed, a sound of pure joy. "And you," she said, lightly tapping his chest, "are a much better defender than you are a sander." He laughed with her, and in the quiet warmth of the afternoon, surrounded by their shared, chaotic work in progress, they both knew that this was just the beginning. The kiss, in the dusty, half-painted bakery, changed everything. The unspoken tension that had simmered between them for weeks finally erupted, clearing the air and leaving behind something warm, real, and slightly terrifying. They were no longer just a landlord and his quirky tenant, or a billionaire and his clumsy assistant. They were something else, something new. The days that followed were a blur of giddy happiness and paint fumes. The renovation of the sweet rise continued, but now it felt less like work and more like a shared project. They painted walls side by side, their playful arguments over the best '80s bands often ending in laughter and accidental paint smudges on each other's noses. Levi was still hopelessly clumsy with tools, but now his incompetence was a source of endless amusement rather than frustration. "You know," Leah said one afternoon, watching him struggle to assemble a simple cafe table. He had somehow managed to attach one of the legs backward. "For a man who orchestrates multi-billion-dollar mergers, you have a surprising inability to follow simple instructions with pictures." "Corporate strategy and IKEA instructions are two entirely different skill sets," he retorted, trying to unscrew the backward leg. "One requires ruthless logic. The other requires a degree in abstract art and possibly a magic wand." She laughed, walking over to help him. "Here, let me." She took the screwdriver and, with a few deft twists, had the leg attached correctly. "You just have to have a little patience." "Patience," he mused, watching her. "Is that what I've been missing?" "Among other things," she teased, but her smile was soft. Their evenings changed too. Instead of going back to his silent penthouse, Levi would often stay, sharing takeout with Leah on the dusty floor of the bakery, surrounded by their work in progress. They'd talk for hours, about everything and nothing. He told her about his suffocating childhood, the immense pressure of the Whitmore name, and his secret love for old, black-and-white noir films. She told him about her grandmother's recipes, her disastrous first attempts at baking, and her dream of creating a place that felt like a hug in the form of a building. One night, sitting amidst paint cans and drop cloths, he brought her a coffee from a 24-hour diner down the street. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and sweet, just the way she liked it. "How did you know?" she asked, cradling the warm cup in her hands. "I listen," he said simply, and in that moment, Leah knew she was in serious trouble, the good kind, the heart-thumping, world-tilting, terrifyingly wonderful kind. She was falling completely and irrevocably in love with her clumsy, lonely billionaire landlord. And the scariest part? She was starting to think he was falling in love with her, too. Their idyllic bubble of sawdust and budding romance was, of course, too good to last. The first crack appeared on a sunny Tuesday morning. Leah was at the local hardware store, happily debating the merits of different shades of wood stain with the owner, a friendly old man named Mr. Henderson. She was covered in a fine layer of sanding dust and was probably the most cheerful-looking mess in the entire store. "So you're the one fixing up the old Miller place," Mr. Henderson said, squinting at a color swatch. "The whole neighborhood is excited. It's about time someone brought some life back to that corner." "I'm trying my best," Leah said with a proud smile. I hear you've got some high-powered help too, he said, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. He gestured to a tabloid magazine sitting on the counter, the kind filled with celebrity gossip and sensational headlines. Saw your picture in here this morning. Leah's smile froze. My picture? Mr. Henderson turned the magazine around. The headline, splashed across a full page in bold, cruel letters, screamed, Billionaire's new pet project. Livy Whitmore plays Pygmalion with Brooklyn Baker. Leah's blood ran cold. The photo was a candid, grainy shot of her and Levi outside the bakery a few days prior. He was in his suit, she was in her paint-splattered overalls. The article was a masterpiece of condescending cruelty, painting her as a pitiful working-class girl that the bored billionaire had decided to rescue and mold as his latest amusement. It twisted their partnership into a pathetic charity case, a rich man's whim. The words pet project, charity case, and Cinderella fantasy were repeated throughout the article, each one a tiny, poisoned dart. The world seemed to tilt. The friendly chatter of the hardware store faded into a dull roar in her ears. She could feel Mr. Henderson's eyes on her, now filled with a new, pitying curiosity. I have to go, she stammered, dropping the wood-stained samples on the counter and practically fleeing the store. She ran the 3 blocks back to the bakery, her heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. She burst through the door and leaned against it, gasping for air, the cruel words of the headline echoing in her mind. Pet project. Charity case. Was that what this was? Was that what everyone thought? Had she just been a fool, a naive girl so swept up in her own fairy tale that she couldn't see the truth? Cassandra's mocking voice came flooding back. You find some broken little bird, nurse it back to health, and then you get bored and move on. She sank to the dusty floor, wrapping her arms around her knees. The buttery yellow walls, which had seemed so full of hope and promise just an hour ago, now felt like the walls of a cage, a beautifully painted cage built by a billionaire for his pet. She was still sitting there, staring at the floor with unseeing eyes, when Levi walked in an hour later. He was in his work clothes, a smile on his face, holding 2 cups of coffee. Hey, I brought reinforcements, he began cheerfully, then stopped, his smile vanishing as he saw the look on her face. Leah? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. She didn't answer. She just stood up, walked over to a nearby newsstand she'd passed on her frantic run back, bought the magazine and held it out to him. He took it, his brow furrowed in confusion. He read the headline, and she watched as every trace of color drained from his face. A muscle in his jaw twitched, a sign of the cold, controlled fury she recognized from the day Cassandra had shown up. Leah, he said, his voice a low, strangled sound. This is garbage. Vicious, disgusting garbage. Is it? She asked, her own voice hollow, devoid of its usual fire. Or is it the truth? The truth? He looked at her, his eyes filled with a hurt that mirrored her own. You can't possibly believe this. I don't know what to believe anymore, she cried, the tears she'd been holding back finally breaking free. It's what she said, isn't it? Cassandra, she said I was your project, and now the whole world thinks so too. Look at me, Levi. A poor girl in paint-splattered overalls being saved by the handsome billionaire. It's the perfect story, isn't it? No, he said, tossing the magazine to the floor as if it were contaminated. He stepped toward her, but she held up a hand, stopping him. Don't, she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't come near me. I need to think. Think about what? He asked, his voice raw with desperation. About whether any of this was real? Leah, look at me. He waited until her tear-filled eyes met his. The work we've done here, the laughter, the conversations, that night, the kiss, was any of that fake to you? No, she admitted, her voice barely audible. It wasn't for me either, he said, his voice full of a fierce, unwavering sincerity. I don't give a damn what some gossip rag says. I don't care what my mother thinks, what Cassandra thinks, or what the entire city of Chicago thinks. The only thing I care about is what you think. He took a tentative step closer. And what I think is that you are the most incredible person I've ever met. You're not a project. You're my partner. She was still crying, but she was listening. They want to tear us down because they don't understand this, he said, gesturing between them. They live in a world of transactions and appearances. We're building something real with our own hands, covered in dust and paint, and it terrifies them. He was standing in front of her now, his eyes pleading. Please don't let them win. Don't let their poison ruin what we're building. She looked at him, at the raw honesty in his eyes, at the man who was fighting for them. To her, the man who was willing to stand with her in the middle of the mess. She took a shaky breath. I'm scared, she confessed. I'm scared they're right. I'm scared I'm just a fool who's going to get her heart broken. Then be scared with me, he said, gently taking her hands, because I'm scared too. I'm terrified of losing you. She looked down at their hands, his, clean and strong, covering hers, which were calloused and smudged with paint. They were from two different worlds, and those worlds were now violently colliding. Okay, she whispered, squeezing his hands. Okay, we fight them. Together. A look of profound relief washed over his face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, his chin resting on the top of her head. Together, he echoed. They stood like that for a long time, the united front in the middle of their half-finished sanctuary. The tabloid story was a declaration of war from Levi's old world. But as he held Leah in his arms, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was never going back. Just as a fragile sense of peace began to settle over them, Levi's phone buzzed in his pocket. He reluctantly let go of Leah to answer it, a grim look already forming on his face. He glanced at the caller ID, and his expression hardened. It's my mother, he said, his voice flat. He answered, his tone shifting back to the formal, clipped cadence of a CEO. Mother, yes, I saw it? No, it's not what you think. A meeting with the board? Now? He listened, his jaw tightening. I understand. I'll be there. He hung up and looked at Leah, his eyes dark with a new, more dangerous storm. The board has called an emergency meeting, he said, his voice grim. They see the article not as a gossip piece, but as a threat to the company's image. They think my personal life is making the Whitmore brand look unstable. He ran a hand through his hair. They're demanding an explanation, and a solution. Leah's heart sank. She knew what a solution meant. It meant him distancing himself from her. It meant proving to his world that she was, in fact, just a temporary amusement. The battle had just begun. The drive from Brooklyn to the gleaming steel and glass fortress of Whitmore Tower in Manhattan felt like a journey between two separate universes. Levi sat in the back of his town car, the scent of sawdust and wet paint still faintly clinging to his casual clothes. He had changed into his suit in the car, the crisp fabric feeling like a costume, an armor he no longer wanted to wear. He found Leah waiting for him at the entrance of the bakery, her face etched with worry. You're really going? She asked, her voice small. I have to, he said, adjusting his tie, which suddenly felt too tight. But they're not going to be meeting the man who left this morning. She reached out and straightened his collar, a small, intimate gesture that felt more grounding than anything else in his life. Don't let them make you forget the man you've become, she said, her eyes searching his. The one who's terrible at painting, but makes a pretty good cup of coffee. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile. They're about to meet the man you helped me become, Leah. And I have a feeling they're not going to like him very much. He leaned in and kissed her, a brief but firm kiss full of unspoken promises. Wait for me. Always, she whispered as he got back into the car. She watched the black car disappear down the street, a cold knot of dread forming in her stomach. She knew he was walking into a war, and she could only pray that he would come back to her. The boardroom on the 60th floor was a temple of cold corporate power. A single monstrous slab of polished mahogany served as the table, surrounded by 12 severe-looking board members who looked like they had been carved from the same stone. At the head of the table, presiding over the silent judgment, sat Beatrice Whitmore, Levi's mother. Her face was a mask of icy composure, but her eyes held a glint of triumphant fury. Levi walked in, and the already silent room seemed to grow even quieter. He didn't take his usual seat at the head of the table. Instead, he remained standing, a solitary figure against the panoramic view of the city. Levi, his mother began, her voice cutting through the silence. We are here to discuss a matter of grave concern. This public spectacle you've been making of yourself. She slid a copy of the tabloid magazine across the table. It landed in front of him with a soft, accusatory thud. The optics are a disaster, chimed in Mr. Abernathy, a man whose face seemed permanently fixed in a scowl. The Whitmore brand is synonymous with prestige, with control. This story makes you look impulsive, foolish. It affects shareholder confidence. It's the girl, of course, another board member, a woman with a severe haircut, added. She's a distraction, a liability. She's not one of us. Levi listened, his expression unreadable. Your father built this company on a foundation of discipline and impeccable reputation, his mother continued, her voice dripping with disappointment. You are tarnishing his legacy by cavorting with a commoner in a construction site and turning our family into a tabloid joke. So, what is it you want? Levi finally asked, his voice calm, steady. Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. It's simple. You will end this association immediately. You will make a generous donation to her little bakery project, enough to make her go away quietly, and you will issue a public statement clarifying that she was merely a recipient of the Whitmore Foundation's charitable outreach. It was the ultimatum. The choice between his world and hers laid bare on the polished mahogany. Levi was silent for a long moment. He looked at the faces around the table, cold, calculating, concerned only with image and profit. He thought of Leah, covered in dust, her face lit up with pure joy as she talked about her dream. He thought of the easy laughter, the shared takeout, the feeling of building something real with his own hands, however clumsily. You're right, he said at last. A wave of relief seemed to pass through the room. His mother's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You are absolutely right, Levi continued, his voice gaining a new, hard edge. This is a problem of image, a problem of value. He walked slowly around the table, his presence dominating the room. For years, the Whitmore brand has been built on an image of untouchable, sterile perfection. We fund museums that no one but the elite ever visits. We sponsor galas where people applaud for the price tag of the champagne. We build a legacy of beautiful, silent, empty things. He stopped and leaned his hands on the table, looking at each and every one of them. And then, a woman who sells pizza for a living gets stuck in an elevator with me. A woman who works 60 hours a week to chase a dream, who isn't afraid to get her hands dirty, who has more integrity and heart in her little finger than this entire board combined. His mother's face had turned to stone. Levi, that is enough. Oh, I'm just getting started, he said, his voice rising with a passion they had never heard from him before. You talk about shareholder value. Let me tell you about real value. Real value is building something from nothing. It's the courage to chase a dream when the world tells you can't. It's the authenticity of a woman who would rather be covered in paint in a room full of hope than dressed in Chanel in a room full of lies. He stood up straight, his eyes blazing. You want me to end my association with Leah Phillips? I'm afraid I can't do that, because I am just beginning my association with her. She is not my project, she is my partner, and she has shown me a world that is so much more valuable than this one. This is absurd, Abernathy spluttered. You're throwing your career away for a girl. No, Levi said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. I'm finally starting my life. And to prove it, he walked to the head of the table and picked up a folder. This is the quarterly budget for the Whitmore Arts Endowment, my mother's proudest achievement. A fund that spends $12 million a year acquiring art that sits in a vault. He looked directly at his mother. As of this moment, the Whitmore Arts Endowment is being dissolved. Its entire capital is being redirected. You can't do that, Beatrice hissed, her composure finally cracking. I can, Levi said, his voice like steel. I'm the chairman of the fund, and I am redirecting its entire focus. It will now be called the Phillips Grant for Artisans and Dreamers. It will provide seed money, mentorship, and support for small business owners, for artists, for bakers, for people like Leah, who build the world instead of just buying it. The room was in stunned, absolute silence. He had taken their most sacred symbol of status and publicly repurposed it in her name. It was the ultimate act of defiance, the ultimate declaration of his allegiance. My association with Leah Phillips is not a threat to this company's image, Levi said, his voice ringing with conviction. Her values are the new image of this company. Integrity, authenticity, hard work. If any of you have a problem with that, my resignation is on the table. He looked at his mother one last time. You gave me an ultimatum. Now I'm giving you one. Choose the future or be left behind with the silent, empty things of the past." Without waiting for a response, Levi turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a trail of shattered expectations and stunned silence in his wake. He didn't know if he was still the CEO, if he still had a family fortune, or what the future held. But as he stepped into the elevator, the same elevator where it had all begun, he felt something he hadn't felt in his entire life. He felt free. Leah was trying to sand a window frame, but her hands were shaking too much. Every passing minute felt like an hour. She kept checking her phone, her stomach a tight knot of anxiety. What was happening in that boardroom? Had they broken him? Had he caved? She was so lost in her worried thoughts that she didn't hear the door open. "You know," a quiet voice said from behind her, "you're going to sand right through the wood if you keep that up." She spun around. It was Levi. He was leaning against the doorframe, his tie loosened, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder. He looked exhausted, but there was a new lightness in his eyes, a calm she had never seen before. "What happened?" she asked, her voice a breathless whisper. Did they fire you?" He walked slowly toward her, a small, tired smile on his face. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted. "But it doesn't matter." "It doesn't matter," she said, incredulous. "Levi, your company, your family. They gave me a choice," he said, stopping in front of her. "Them or you." He reached out and gently tucked a dusty strand of hair behind her ear. "It wasn't a choice at all." She stared at him, trying to read his face. "What did you do?" "I told them that you are the most valuable asset I've ever been associated with," he said, his voice soft. "And I told them that the family foundation, the one they use to show off their status, is now going to be a fund for people like you. People who build things. I named it after you." Leah's knees felt weak. She had to grip the windowsill for support. He hadn't just defended her, he had honored her, publicly, sacrificially. You named it after me?" "The Phillips Grant," he said, his smile widening. "It has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not tears of fear or hurt. They were tears of overwhelming, heart-stopping love. "You're insane," she whispered. "Completely," he agreed. He gently took her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "I'm completely, utterly, and irrevocably insane about you, Leah Phillips." "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if they do fire you?" "Then," he said, his eyes full of a future she was just beginning to see, "I guess I'll have a lot more free time to help you with your bakery. Though, you should know, I'm still a terrible painter." She laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy and relief. "We'll work on it." "I love you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you too," she sobbed, and then she was kissing him, a desperate, joyful, grateful kiss that was a promise of 1,000 shared sunrises in their dusty, half-finished, perfect world. He had walked into the lion's den for her, and he had walked out a king. Her king. The moments after Levi's return to the bakery were a blur of raw, unvarnished emotion. They stood in the middle of the dusty, half-finished room, their sanctuary, and simply held each other. The war with his old world was over, and in its place was a quiet, profound certainty. "So?" Leah finally whispered into his paint-splattered shirt. "Are you officially an unemployed, terrible painter now?" He chuckled, a low, relieved sound. "I might be. And honestly, I've never felt richer." They spent the rest of the day in their bubble, not talking about the board, or the money, or the future. They talked about the bakery. They chose the final color for the front door, a cheerful, welcoming blue. They debated the ideal placement for the big reading armchair. They built something tangible, something real, because the corporate world Levi had just left behind suddenly felt like a distant, irrelevant dream. The real world, however, had not forgotten about him. The next morning, as they were sharing coffee and donuts from a local shop, sitting on the floor of the nearly completed bakery, Levy's phone rang. It was Sandra, his assistant. He hesitated, then answered, putting it on speaker. "Levy," Sandra's voice was tense. "The board concluded their meeting. Your mother, she formally proposed a vote to remove you as CEO." Leah's hand instinctively found his, her fingers lacing with his. "I see," Levi said, his voice calm-reliant. "And what was the result?" There was a pause, and then Sandra's voice broke with a hint of a smile. "The vote was 11-1 against her. They voted to keep you as CEO." Levi was stunned into silence. "What? Abernathy and the others, they were furious at first, Sandra explained. But then Arthur Vance, your father's cousin on the board, he stood up. He said that in 40 years, he had never seen you show the kind of leadership and integrity you showed yesterday. He said your father built an empire, but you were finally giving it a soul. Leah squeezed his hand, her own eyes filling with tears. He proposed a motion not just to keep you, but to formally endorse the new direction of the foundation, Sandra continued, her voice now full of excitement. The Phillips grant was approved unanimously. Your mother was the only dissenting vote. She left the meeting before it was even over. Levi, they're with you. They see what you're trying to build. Levi hung up the phone, a slow, disbelieving smile spreading across his face. He had been ready to lose everything. Instead, he had won. Not by fighting their way, but by fighting his way. He looked at Leah, at the woman who had started all of this, the woman who had shown him what real value was. He had walked into that boardroom to defend her. He had walked out having redefined himself. So, she said, her voice teasing, but her eyes shining with pride, I guess I'm not dating an unemployed painter after all. I'm dating a CEO with a soul. You are, he said, pulling her close, and that CEO has a very important question to ask his partner. 2 weeks later, the Sweet Rise was no longer a dusty construction site. It was a dream made real. The air was thick, with the intoxicating scent of cinnamon, melting chocolate, and fresh brewed coffee. The buttery yellow walls were warm and inviting, the wooden floors gleamed, and in the corner, by the large front window, sat a big, ridiculously comfortable-looking armchair, just as she had described it. Leah was in the kitchen, her hands covered in flour, a smudge on her cheek, humming happily as she pulled a tray of perfect golden-brown croissants from the new oven. The grand opening was the next day, and she was in her own personal heaven. The bell above the door jingled, and Levi walked in. He was back in a suit, but it looked different on him now. Less like armor, more like just clothes. He was smiling, a real, easy smile that reached his eyes. It smells, he said, taking a deep breath, like happiness. It is happiness, she said, her own smile radiant. Come here. You have to try this. She broke off a piece of the warm croissant and held it out to him. He took a bite, and his eyes closed in pure bliss. Leah, he murmured, this is art. It's just butter and flour, she said, blushing. No, he said, his expression turning serious. It's your dream, and it's perfect. He took her flour-dusted hands in his. We built this together. We turned this empty, forgotten place into this. You mostly just stepped in paint trays, she teased, but her heart was hammering in her chest. And I was very good at it, he said with a smile. He gently wiped the smudge of flour from her cheek with his thumb. Leah Phillips, he began, his voice dropping to a low, intense murmur. A few months ago, I was a man stuck in a metal box, both literally and figuratively. I lived a life that was scheduled, sterile, and silent. And then I met a woman who shared her pizza with me, who wasn't afraid to tell me my cologne smelled like arguments, and who showed me what it was like to build something real. Tears started to well in her eyes. You came into my life like a power surge, shutting everything down and then turning all the lights on for the first time. He continued, his voice thick with emotion. You're not my project. You're my partner, my best friend, my entire world. I don't want to be your landlord anymore, Leah. He reached into his pocket and knelt down on one knee, right there on the flour-dusted floor of the bakery they had built together. He opened a small, simple velvet box. Inside was a ring, not a massive, ostentatious diamond, but a delicate, elegant band that was as understated and as beautiful as their love. I want to be your husband, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. I want to wake up to the smell of cinnamon every morning. I want to argue with you about paint colors for the rest of our lives. I want to build a home with you, fill it with laughter and maybe a few clumsy paint-splattered kids. He took a shaky breath. Will you marry me, Leah? She was sobbing now, a sound of pure, overwhelming joy. Yes, she whispered, nodding frantically. Yes, you clumsy, wonderful, terrible painter. Of course, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it was a perfect fit. He stood and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around in a circle, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. He kissed her, a deep, loving kiss that tasted of flour, cinnamon, and the sweet promise of a lifetime of shared dreams. 2 years later. The bell above the door of the Sweet Rise jingled constantly. The bakery was the heart of the neighborhood, a bustling, happy place always filled with the scent of fresh bread and the sound of cheerful chatter. Behind the counter, a very pregnant Leah Phillips laughed as she handed a croissant to a regular customer. Her life was a beautiful, chaotic masterpiece. The bakery was a runaway success, and the Phillips grant had already helped launch over 50 small businesses across the city, run by artisans and dreamers just like her. That evening, she arrived home to the house they had bought in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It wasn't a silent, minimalist mansion. It was a home filled with warm colors, comfortable furniture, and the happy mess of a life well lived. She found Levi on the living room floor, surrounded by building blocks, in the middle of a very serious construction project with their 1-year-old daughter, a little girl with her mother's fiery spirit and her father's intense blue eyes. "The tower is unstable, Daddy," little Lily giggled, knocking over a stack of blocks. "We have a structural integrity problem," Levi said with mock seriousness before tickling his daughter, who shrieked with laughter. Leah stood in the doorway, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The silent house was gone. In its place was this, the beautiful, noisy, perfect sound of her family. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, they sat on the living room floor, sharing a pizza, this time from a box, eaten with their hands. "You know," Levi said, taking a bite, "I was thinking about that first day in the elevator." "Oh, the day I so gracefully depantsed a billionaire?" she teased. "That's the one," he said with a smile. "I thought my world was ending. My meeting, my schedule, it was all ruined." He looked at her, his eyes full of a deep, abiding love. "I had no idea it was just beginning." She leaned over and kissed him softly. "So," she whispered against his lips, "was the pizza adequate?" He smiled, pulling her closer. "It was perfect," he murmured. "Everything about it was perfect." And in the quiet warmth of their home, surrounded by the echoes of their children's laughter, they knew they had built something far more valuable than a company, and far more delicious than a bakery. They had built a life. And it was, in every single way, real. What did you think of the story of Levi and Leah? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate their journey from a stuck elevator to a life full of love? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And for everyone who has stayed with us until the very end, who believes that sometimes the best things in life happen when all our plans break down, please comment the Sweet Rise. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that will change the world.